Welcome back to the Wind Up with Will. I'm your host, Will, here with another video. Filmed the same day. I'll probably upload this sometime tomorrow. I actually remember to turn my light on now so you can see me a little better. And I have some notes. I've spent probably the last hour or so, close to it, just looking over the college football rankings and trying to come up with exactly what I'm going to say in this video. And I've got some notes here, and I've got the current rankings pulled up, got the AP poll pulled up. We're gonna be talking, as if you could tell from what I'm talking about, the college football playoff rankings, how the playoffs are gonna look, how the playoffs look currently, how they will look in a few weeks, and I'm also going to talk about the NFL. I've not talked about either the NFL or college football in a while, and I just don't have the time for it. But I'm going to be bringing back a video today to specifically talk about each of these. So let's just get started. Let's jump into college football, the college football playoff rankings. So I have the current rankings here in front of me. I'll read the rankings first, and then how this would affect the playoffs. So we're gonna go. I'll do the first. I'll you know what? I'll just read all the top 25. Number one, of course, number one team in the nation is Oregon. Number two is Ohio State. Number three is Georgia. Number four is Miami. This is last week's. I should say this is last week's. This was last Tuesday. This is before this weekend's game. So last Tuesday's rankings. As I said, I would like to get out a video sooner, but there was a lot going on last Tuesday with the election. There was college football playoff rankings, and then there was something else that happened. It was the NFL draft deadline. I knew there was, because there was a lot of jokes being made that the college football playoff. There was a very important decisions to be made on Tuesday in terms of the college football playoff and the draft. And then there was this thing called the election later on. So people were making jokes about that. But last Tuesday, these are their rankings. They had Oregon number one. They had Ohio State number two. Georgia 3, Miami at 4, Texas at 5, Penn State at 6, Tennessee at 7, Indiana at 8, BYU at 9, Notre Dame at 10, Alabama at 11, Boise State at 12, SMU at 13, Texas A&M at 14, LSU 15, Ole Miss 16, Iowa State 17, Pittsburgh at 18, Kansas State at 19, Colorado at 20, Washington State at 21, Louisville at 22, Clemson at 23, Missouri at 24, and Army at 25. So those were the rankings last week. And so there's a 12-team college football playoff, if you didn't know that. And the top four conference the highest four ranked conference winners will get a bye in the playoffs, regardless of where they are in the rankings. So, for example, BYU is ranked 9th overall in the standings, but currently lead their conference. And so, based on the rankings, based on how the playoff would shake down, if they were to actually win their conference, they would be the number 4 seed in the playoffs, even though they're ranked 9th. So it's going to change how teams are seeded slightly. So the current playoff bracket based off of last week's rankings, which this is going to change after some upsets this last week or this weekend. Oregon at the number 1 seed, Georgia at number 2, leading the SEC, Miami at 3, BYU at 4. Those are the 4 highest ranked conference leaders based off of last week. Then at 5, we had, where's 5 at? We had Ohio State matching up against Boise State, the 12th seed. At 6, we had Texas matching up against Alabama, the 11th seed. At 7, we had Penn State hosting Notre Dame, my favorite college football team. And then we had the 8th seed Tennessee hosting number 9 Indiana, which has been one of the greatest stories in college football this season. They had 9 wins combined over the last 3 years and have 10 wins this season after this past weekend. Phenomenal season for them, phenomenal story. and we'll see in a moment where I have them ranked and where I think they're going to end up in the playoffs. So that's how the current playoffs were last week. There's going to be some changes after the upsets this weekend. Miami got upset by Georgia Tech, who has been a good team this year and has had some quality wins. Georgia Tech's not going to get in the playoffs. They're 6-4, but they beat Miami 28-23. So Miami's going to drop in the standings, and it actually puts SMU as the conference leader currently. And Clemson, I don't know forgive me, I don't know the ACC tiebreaker, but if Clemson and Miami are tied in the standings, I'm not sure who would play in the conference title game if SMU goes undefeated in conference. I don't know who would face SMU in that game. So Miami's upset; they're going to drop in the seat in the rankings. Georgia, who was leading the SEC, was upset by Ole Miss. They're going to drop in the standings. I don't know if there was. Let's just go through and see what other upset. I think there was at least another upset or two. I don't know why my app is refusing to load. Sorry, I don't know why it would not go back the previous week or this past week. Okay, so I've got the scores from this past week in front of me. Georgia Tech beat Miami. That was upset. Ole Miss beat Georgia 28-10. That was a big win for Ole Miss. They were currently ranked 16th. I think that's going to bump them up to being back in the playoff projections. They were kind of in the hunt, but a win over Georgia is going to bump them up, and Georgia is really riding the edge of whether they're going to be in the playoffs or not. Kansas beat Iowa State 45-36. That's a huge upset and really puts a dent in Iowa State's chances at making the college football playoff. Clemson survived Virginia Tech at 24-10. Clemson is treading thin ice. I was going to say this if I'd gotten a video out earlier, but I think Clemson probably has one of the most overrated rankings this season. A couple weeks ago, I think it was Joe Klatt had them like number 6 in the country, and a lot of people were having them top 10. I think they were ranked 11th in the AP. They were just ranked really high. Actually, I want to see where they were, and I think I said them a while ago. Yeah, they were 23rd in the college football playoff, but a few weekends ago, they they were ranked really high. A lot of people were saying they're going to win the ACC, and I was saying I think they're overrated. They've played no one all year outside of Georgia the first week of the season, and they got hammered by Georgia. I think it was 34-3. They are not the same team as they were when Trevor Lawrence was there at quarterback, when Deshaun Watson was there. They're not the same team as that. And people have to understand it. They've not gone after players in the transfer portal. They're not spending NIL. That's what Dabo Swinney wants to do, and I'm not going to criticize him over that. That's a whole nother conversation for another video over NIL and transfer. But they're not getting the talent that other teams have, and they've played in a super easy schedule outside of Georgia this year. So when they were playing Louisville, who is a good team, Louisville is who I predicted would be in the ACC title game. Actually, I have my preseason projections here. I actually had Louisville losing in the ACC title game to Florida State, but still making the playoffs. Louisville's a good team, and I thought they would beat Clemson. Obviously, there's no video proof of me saying that, but they did. They beat Clemson and knocked off Clemson's chances at put a dent in their chances to make the playoff. I think Clemson would still have to win the ACC to get in. The ACC and Big 12, from the rankings, from how their teams have looked this year, especially from how the rankings have them, unless you win either the Big 12 conference or the ACC conference, you're not getting in the playoffs. More than likely. I think there's a chance that maybe if like BYU loses in the conference title game, I think they should get in. I think if SMU loses in the title game, maybe they ought to be in the conversation. Their only loss so far in the regular season has been to BYU, who has looked really good. So I think there's a few exceptions to that. If SMU were to lose in the conference title game, or if BYU were to lose in the conference title game, I would like to hope that they get in, but we'll see how the rankings shape out from here. Something worth mentioning, the SEC has a real logjam in terms of their teams. If I can just pull up the SEC standings currently, there's a chance. I think there's currently one, two, three, four, five. There's five SEC teams currently with 2 losses. And then you have 3 teams with 1 loss. Tennessee, A&M, and Texas all have 1 loss. Tennessee and A&M are tied at the top with 5-1. Texas is 4-1 in the standings. Georgia's 5-2. Ole Miss is 4-2. Alabama's 4-2. Missouri's 3-2. LSU's 3-2. And then you have South Carolina, who's ranked at 4-3. Now, I know a lot of people, including Josh Pate, are saying the SEC could get 5 teams in. You're really going to tell me that if Georgia has 3 losses, that some other team ought to get in over them? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's what a lot of people say. I think if you get 3 losses, I think you're out. I think there's too many quality teams with 1 losses or 2 losses to give them the shaft and put in a three loss Georgia team. I'm sorry, your record is what it is. If you have 3 losses, I think that's unfortunate. Unless nearly every team in the country has 3 losses, then that's a conversation of who's the better team. But when you have 3 losses, your resume is just not as good as a team that only has 1 loss and maybe loses in their conference title game like a BYU. So I just don't see that. Also, it's just pure chaos. Um, there is a way to do this depending on how the teams go. There's a lot of different scenarios. I won't go into them. There is, if you look up on Google, there's someone on Reddit created a SEC tiebreaker thing where you can put in the teams who beats who on the last few weekends, and it will tell you the tiebreakers of who's facing off in the SEC title game, what the standings are. So go check that out. Go mess around with it on all the different scenarios. You can see that there. I'm just going to discuss what I think will happen, and then I'm going to go into my projections. I'm also going to briefly mention the Big Ten because it's interesting how the Big Ten finish could go as well. As I said, Tennessee, A&M, and Texas all have 1 loss. I think the SEC title game is going to come down to really 2 games. It's going to come down to Tennessee versus Georgia and A&M versus Texas. Those are the 2 games to watch out for that are going to determine who is in the SEC title game. A&M and Texas both have 1 loss. Whoever wins that game, based on what appears to be pretty easy schedules the rest of the way out, whoever wins between Texas and A&M will be in the SEC title game. That is what I'm saying. You can take that to the bank. I hope I don't say this and it goes completely awry, but I think that's what's going to happen. Texas, last 3 games, they play at Arkansas, who has a good win over Tennessee this year, but I think Texas is a better team. They're already a 13.5-point favorite. I think Texas will win that game. Then they can get Kentucky at home. Kentucky has a good defense. Kentucky has taken teams to the wire this year. They beat Ole Miss. They played Tennessee close for 3 quarters. They nearly beat Georgia. Kentucky is not a team to overlook, but Texas ought to beat them. They will beat Kentucky. Then their last game of the year is at A&M. That's their tough game. If they win that game, they're in the SEC title game. A&M's schedule, they get New Mexico State at home. If they lose to that game, there's no way they're making the college football playoff. That'll be their 3rd loss and a very bad loss. New Mexico State's 2-7. Are they even an FBS? I believe they're an FBS school. Yes, they're in Conference USA. They're last place in the Conference USA. That should be an easy win. Texas A&M's a 39.5-point favorite. That's a cakewalk. They then play at Auburn. Again, it shouldn't be viewed as a pushover game. It's in the SEC. Auburn has 3 wins on the year. Who has Auburn actually beat? Kentucky. And what was their... Looks like their only conference win is Kentucky, I think. Yes, their only conference win is Kentucky. Auburn should be an easy win for them. Crap, I got off the standings by accident. Oh, go back to A&M. They should beat Auburn and New Mexico State. I don't know. I shouldn't have clicked on those and gone into those teams. But A&M plays New Mexico State at home. They're 39.5-point favorite. They then play at Auburn. They should win that game. Their last game is at Texas. For both of those teams, Texas and A&M, whoever wins that game will be playing an SEC title game. You can take that to the bank. I guarantee that. The other thing, the other game that it's going to come down to is Tennessee versus Georgia. If Georgia wins that game, because they have 2 losses and a bunch of other schools have 2 losses, we could look at a variety of different teams perhaps being in that spot. I think the current projections, if Georgia were to beat Tennessee, would be Alabama based on how the tiebreakers work. I'm not exactly sure on what the exact tiebreaker is. I'm just going off of the model and what people are talking about if who beats who. If Georgia were to beat Tennessee, Alabama would be in the SEC title game versus A&M or Texas. Based on how the current standings are, based on how likely the games are to fall. And that would pretty much guarantee, I think, Alabama getting in, even if they lose the SEC title game and have that 3rd loss just to make the SEC title game having 3 losses. I don't think they're going to be kept out of the playoff. I think this only works in the SEC and the Big Ten this year. No other team is getting in with 3 losses unless you are in the Big Ten or the SEC playing in the title game. And I think it's likely to happen. It very well could happen in the SEC. I'm not saying it's likely, but it could happen with the team's 3rd loss coming in the SEC title game and them still making the playoffs. But I personally think Texas is going to beat A&M. I think they're the better team. A&M has not looked perfect this year. They played a good Notre Dame team and lost to them opening weekend, and then they got the kind of the doors blown off by South Carolina last week. I think A&M is going to be fired up to go play, but I think Texas is the better school. Texas only has 1 loss on the year, and it was to Georgia, who I think is a very good quality team, a very good team, but I think Georgia might possibly miss the playoffs, depending on how their season goes. I think if they beat Tennessee, I think Georgia stays in, but I think if their 3rd loss is to Tennessee, I think that's kicking Georgia out. I think 3 losses, you're out this year. I think in future years you might have a shot, but this year 3 losses and you're out of the playoffs. I think that's unfortunately how that's going to go for teams this year. But let's just go to what I think is going to happen. I think Tennessee beats Georgia. Georgia has just not. The loss to Ole Miss, I think, has really solidified it. That this isn't the same Georgia team from a few years ago. They've looked shaky, and even some of their wins, barely beating UK. They didn't look necessarily good in the Alabama game until like the late in the game. Florida played them close for a while. They just don't look the same. They don't have the same feel. I'm picking Tennessee to win that game at Georgia. I think that's how that's going to go. Tennessee's looked pretty good all year. Their only loss was at Arkansas. I'm picking Tennessee to win that game. Tennessee wins that game, plays in the SEC title game. Texas beats A&M, plays in the SEC title game. That's the easiest thing. Clean hands. You don't have to go into all the weird scenarios. I think Texas will beat Tennessee. Excuse me. I think Texas will beat Tennessee in the SEC title game if those are the 2 teams playing there. I think Texas has been a good team all year. Their only loss was to Georgia, who's a good team. Tennessee's 1 loss was at Arkansas. I'm just gonna give the slight edge to Texas. I think they're slightly better. Tennessee can maybe win. Don't hate me, Tennessee fans. But you're still gonna make the playoffs. You're still gonna make the playoffs. You made the SEC title game. You're making the playoffs. The other interesting situation would be in the Big Ten. So in the Big Ten, we have the very interesting story of Indiana, who is 7-0, tied at the top of the standings with Oregon. Indiana in the AP poll is ranked 5th. In the college football playoff poll, they're ranked 8th. They're 10-0. They beat Michigan, who's the defending champions, even though Michigan's not had that great of a year. They beat Nebraska, who has had an okay season. But outside that, Indiana's not really played anyone, I don't think, based on their schedule. They played Washington, they beat Washington, who's kind of the middle of the standings. Michigan State's kind of the middle of the standings. Most of the teams they have beaten are either at the bottom or in the middle of the standings. Michigan was kind of a real test this past weekend. They were a good team, but they still beat them. The real test is going to be 2 weekends from now. They have this weekend, excuse me, they have this coming weekend off. They have a bye week. Next weekend they're going the following weekend, so 2 weekends from now, they're going to play at Ohio State. That's going to be the real test. If Indiana beats Ohio State and plays in the Big Ten title game, you can just pencil in Indiana in the college football playoffs. If their only loss is in the Big Ten title game to Oregon, they're in the playoffs. If they lose close to Ohio State, I think they're still in the playoffs. Their only loss would be a close loss at Ohio State. I think they're still going to get in. I think the committee, which has members from the Big Ten and is it the commissioner or the president? No, I think it's the chair. The committee chair is, I think, the Big Ten commissioner, right? So there's no way that if Indiana has a close loss to Ohio State that they're out of the playoffs, that they're somehow going to take a possible 3-loss Georgia team or a 3-loss Alabama team or a 3-loss A&M team over them. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. I know they have not played a tough schedule, but if their only loss is a close loss to Ohio State, who is ranked currently second in the country, I don't think you can just kick them out the door when that's their one loss and they play in a power conference. I'm sorry, I just don't think that you can. That's just how it is. And I kind of feel the same way about BYU. If they were to somehow lose in the conference title game, that they shouldn't get ousted from the playoffs. So there's really the interesting part is who is going to play in that Big Ten title game. Is Indiana going to beat Ohio State, or is Ohio State going to come out on top? And if Ohio State does beat Indiana, how close is the score, and does that keep Indiana in the standings? Now, my current projection would be to say that Ohio State's going to beat Indiana, but Indiana's going to play them closer than a lot of people expect, and that's going to keep Indiana in the playoffs. But and send Ohio State to the Big Ten title game with a rematch with Oregon, which that was my preseason prediction. I said Oregon would beat them in Eugene, and then they would play again in the Big Ten title game, and Ohio State would beat them the second time. That was my preseason prediction. But after having watched some games this season, I think Oregon probably is the number one team in the country. Ohio State didn't look necessarily impressive against Penn State. You could say their defense looked good, but also Penn State's offense did not look good at all in that game. So I just think Oregon's a better team. I'm going to say Oregon beats Ohio State in that Big Ten title game and remains number one. I know this video has stretched on for a while, and it's probably going to take a while for me to upload this based on how slow my internet is. But we're now going to go into what I think what the playoffs will look like if my predictions hold true and who I think is going to win. So I said Texas and Tennessee face off in the SEC title game. Texas wins that. Oregon beats Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, but Indiana plays Ohio State close in that regular season game. So they're still alive and they still make the playoffs. I think if they play them close, they'll make the playoffs. So this is how I think the playoffs are going to go. The top 4 seeds, I have Oregon at 1, Texas at 2. I have BYU at 3, and I'm picking SMU at 4 to win the ACC. I think SMU is going to beat Miami. Miami has played with fire too much this year in games that they maybe ought to lose, and they find a way to win. And they finally got burnt this past weekend against Georgia Tech. I think Miami is a good, very talented team, and very well still could win the ACC. But SMU's in the driver's seat, and their only loss on the year is a close loss to BYU. I think SMU might be the better team. I have them just beating Miami in the ACC title game to get that 4th spot. I think BYU is probably, I think based on the current standings, they're going to face, if the standings hold out, that they're going to face Colorado in the Big 12 title game. I think that'll be a super fun matchup. But if they beat Colorado, that's Colorado's 3rd loss on the year. I think that knocks them out of the playoffs. The only way Colorado's getting in is if they win the Big 12 title game. Also, it's worth noting that Iowa State and Kansas State, Arizona State, and West Virginia all have 2 losses, so technically those teams are still alive in the hunt for that spot, but I think it's going to be BYU and Colorado. BYU's winning that game. So 1 seed Oregon, 2 seed Texas, 3 seed BYU, 4 seed SMU. It was after picking my conference champions here. It was very hard after this, just trying to determine who's going to go where based on the rest of the year. I maybe should have just done my current projections of who I think's where, but I just figured I would go ahead and do what it's going to look like at the end. Maybe after the most current rankings, I'll reevaluate and do how I would rank the teams. But this is how I think the end of season playoff is going to look like after everything. So we've got the top 4 teams figured out. At 5, I have Ohio State. I think if they're going to lose in that Big 12 title game, or Big 10 title game to Oregon, that's their only loss that's their second loss in the year, but they've lost to Oregon twice now. I think they're going to be the 5 seed. I don't think that they're going to necessarily drop off far unless they lose big to Oregon. 6 seed, I have Tennessee. If they're going to lose in the SEC title game, that's only their second loss. They beat Georgia at Georgia. I think Tennessee has done enough on their resume to be 6. 7, I have Penn State. I think they're still a really good program. Their only loss is going to be to Ohio State. They've done enough to make the playoff, but they're not. I think they have a better resume than some of the 2-loss SEC teams just because they have 2 losses. And the SEC, as people have been pointing out, really hurt itself by not having a 9-game conference schedule where it could kind of sort out the tie-breaking situations, which is probably going to get a couple teams maybe ousted because they're all just kind of tied and it's based on tiebreakers on how the standings are going to fall. But that's a topic for another time. We've talked about that enough. So I think Penn State's going to be 7. 8, I have Notre Dame. That's where Notre Dame is currently ranked, I believe, in the AP poll. Yeah, the AP poll has Notre Dame 8. The college football playoff has them 10. I think if Georgia's going to have that 3rd loss, they're gonna drop out of the playoffs. And if Indiana loses a close game to Ohio State, Notre Dame's going to jump over them to get up to 8. And at 9, who Notre Dame would be hosting, I have Indiana. I think they have a good resume. They're just going to have that 1 loss to Ohio State at the end of the year. I think they're good enough to get in, but not super high. So I'm picking Indiana to face Notre Dame. At 10, I have Alabama going to play at Penn State. What a game that would be if that turned out to be a whiteout playoff game at Penn State hosting Alabama. That would be an insane atmosphere to be at. At 11, I have Ole Miss playing at Tennessee. I think that's going to be a super fun game too. If that is how the playoffs work out. Ole Miss has a good offense. Tennessee has one of the best defenses in the country. That's going to be fun to watch. And at 12, I have Boise State winning the Mountain West. They are currently projected. They're currently ranked 12th in the rankings, and they're currently projected to more than likely be the group of 5 team that gets in. I don't think Army's going to beat Notre Dame, and I think that even if they do win the American Conference, it's not going to be enough to overcome Boise State's only loss being a close loss to the number 1 team in the country, Oregon. So that's how I currently have it. I'm not going to go into who I think is going to beat who in the playoffs, but I have Oregon at 1, Texas at 2, BYU at 3, SMU at 4, Ohio State at 5, Tennessee at 6, Penn State at 7, Notre Dame at 8, Indiana at 9, Alabama at 10, Ole Miss at 11, and Boise State at 12. And my first 2 teams that are out are Miami and Georgia. I think Georgia definitely has a really good resume, but if they lose to Tennessee at home, that's a 3rd loss that's going to knock them out. In Miami, I think if they lose to SMU, whoever loses in the ACC title game is also going to be one of the first 2 teams out, I think. Unfortunately, you would like to see SMU maybe still make it if they lose in that game, but it would be their second loss on the year. I just think that it's not going to be enough if that's their second loss or Miami's second loss is in that title game. It's going to knock them out over some of these two-loss SEC teams. Even though the committee has said that they're not going to punish teams for losing in that conference title game, but I think it's going to be like it's enough. It's a little bit. It's a little. There's a little difference there. I think that's how they're going to look at it. It's not going to be like, oh, you lost your conference title game, it's another loss, get out. It's like, so I think Miami and Georgia are going to be the first two out. And just to show you, I'm going to make sure that my camera can actually see this. I've been looking down a lot. I have the notes in front of me. This video has ran on for 30 minutes. So I'm going to try and quickly go through the NFL here in a second. But this is what, maybe you can't see it very well with my writing. I don't have, so this is how I have the playoff rankings going so far. This is how it's going to line up. Sorry, I don't have great editing skills, so I can't just pull in the standings in a graphic next to me. I wish I could. Maybe I can get to that. I might have to look up how to do editing and just practice on stuff like that. But that's what I have for the college football playoff. This video has ran on for a while, but I am still going to briefly talk about the NFL. Because that's what college football playoff I was definitely want to talk about, but I also want to talk about the NFL. One of my favorite sports leagues, and I've not talked about it in a while on here. Mostly been talking MLB playoffs. So, in Major League Baseball's, I'm sorry, not me. Got baseball on the brain too much. In the NFL, there's been a lot happened since the last time we talked. I'm going to go through the current standings, leaders, and what the playoff teams look like at the moment, maybe some of the bigger stories. In the AFC, we have the Bills leading the East. We have the Steelers leading the North at 7-2. Bills are 8-2 leading the East. Steelers are 7-2 leading the North. Texans are 6-4 leading the AFC South. And the Kansas City Chiefs are 9-0 in the AFC West. But they have had a bunch of injuries at wide receiver. Rashee Rice is out for the year. I believe they have another wide receiver that is injured. They traded for DeAndre Hopkins from my Titans to improve their wide receiving core. In the NFC, we have the Eagles leading the East at 7-2. In the North, we have the Lions leading at 8-1, and the South, we have the Falcons leading at 6-4. A lot of people were saying that was going to be the team this year. They're looking really good at that. I'm looking a little off picking the Bucs in that division, but the Bucs still have a chance. In the NFC West, we have the Cardinals leading at 6-4. Very much a surprise. Some of the top stories so far through the year are Derrick Henry just dominating on rushing, and Lamar Jackson looking to repeat as MVP. He's got the Ravens at 7-3 in a great spot after nearly starting 0-3 on the year. Joe Burrow is lighting up and looking very good for my MVP predictions this year, but his team is 4-6. They've not done very well. They've struggled a lot. They've scored a ton of points in games and found ways to lose. Their defense has let them down. They have not performed how they could have. They put up 34 points the other night, Thursday Night Football, against the Ravens and lost. Jamar Chase had like 260 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Phenomenal game, but they lost. But I'm not counting them out yet. They're 4-6. There's been teams that have had similar records still make the playoffs. My Titans have looked really bad. The offensive line has looked slightly better, especially on the left side. And the run game has looked okay with Tony Pollard. The passing game has been awful. Whether it has been Rudolph in there or Levis. Rudolph has actually looked pretty good over some games. Will Levis, I wasn't able to watch the game this weekend. I just couldn't get it on TV. But from the way the stats looked and the score sheet, looked like he had an okay game coming back. First game from injury. He's been out for a few games. The passing game hasn't been great. The wide receiving game has been affected by the passing game not being great. and the Titans have just not had an offense. That has killed them, and so they've traded off some players like DeAndre Hopkins and some defenders that's just looking like a tank season, and we're going to try and figure out some things at the end of this year going into next year. That's what it looks like for the Titans. The Jags are 2-8. I was thinking they would be a better team than this. They have not looked good at all. They've just struggled at times. Um, the Chargers are 6-3. They've actually played pretty good with Jim Harbaugh. Who would have thought that he was a good football coach? I don't know what the 49ers were doing years ago when they let him go. That was just not a good decision on their part. Goes and wins a championship in college football last year with Michigan, and he is now the head coach of the Chargers, looking to lead them to the playoffs. They beat my Titans this weekend. The Broncos have looked like a much improved team with Bo Nix at quarterback. He has looked pretty good so far, and Sean Payton's just that quarterback whisperer. He can just say a few words in your ear, and all of a sudden you're a good quarterback. That's just how it goes. I wish the Cowboys could have got Sean Payton at head coach. Speaking of the Cowboys, my favorite football team, just slightly better than the Titans. I like both teams, but Cowboys, my favorite team. We stink this year. We've been very bad. We're 3-6 on the year. We've lost 4 in a row. The quarterback play has not been great from Dak when he was playing. He's injured now with a hamstring injury. I think it's a torn hamstring. I think he's going to get reevaluated to make sure that he is out for the year, but he's more than likely going to have season-ending surgery, which means Cooper Rush or Trey Lance is the starting quarterback from now on. Cooper Rush started this weekend. He looked very bad. Trey Lance, fans were chanting, wanting Trey Lance to go in the game. He just got kind of a few plays at the end. I would really like to see Trey Lance play because he's just not played a ton, and maybe he can offer something that we haven't seen from Cooper Rush. Also, the Cowboys have really dug their grave and their future giving Dak Prescott $60 million. It's just idiotic. It's too much a chunk of the Cowboys' salary cap to give any team to give that player that much money. Excuse me. Not named Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is phenomenal and the best player in the league. He's a ton of wide receiver injuries, and he's got his team at 9-0. Now, it's not all him. They had some few calls go their way. Their defense has played okay. But he's won 3 Super Bowls and 2 MVPs, and, what has Dak done to warrant $60 million? It's just too much money. He's out for the year now. The run game has been horrible for the Cowboys. They let Tony Pollard go in the offseason. And instead of pursuing Derrick Henry, the biggest free agent running back, who's tearing it up now with the Ravens, the Cowboys we're going to stay put with Rico Dowdle. And we're going to re-sign Ezekiel Elliott, who has not really looked good the last few years. And that's going to be our run game. And it's like, okay, well, Zeke's coming back. We've had him before. Maybe he'll be good. And he's just not been. He's played. This is the worst season of his career. Rico Dowdle has not done much. The offensive line has not necessarily looked great. They've done okay. They're kind of middle of the road. Dak has not played well at quarterback, and the defense is atrocious, which the defense has had injuries with Micah Parsons out, DeMarcus Lawrence out. Deron Bland has been out the whole year. So the Cowboys have a lot of injuries on defense, and this has been known for a while. Cowboys are top heavy. They pay a lot for their starters, especially their star players, and they don't have money to have quality backups. And this is what has hurt the Cowboys this year. It's what's hurt the Cowboys in the past. It's time for Jerry Jones to step down as general manager. Let someone else run the team that can actually do what's best for the team instead of overpaying star players and getting the Cowboys into bad situations where if several players get injured, all of a sudden the season seems to be in jeopardy. Mike McCarthy also needs to go. He's not a good coach and is clearly just another yes man for Jerry Jones. It's just Jason Garrett all over again. Needs to be proper change there. Also in the NFC East, the Eagles are looking good, even though some people act like Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts are the worst quarterback-coach combination in the history of the NFL. I don't know who needs to hear this, but Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback. Nick Sirianni is a good head coach. Are they the best? No, but they're good. And a few years ago, we had Jalen Hurts in the MVP conversation. He led the Eagles to a Super Bowl appearance a few years ago. I think he's a good quarterback. The tush push works, and I think he's a good quarterback. He's a capable quarterback in the NFL. He's one of the better ones. And the Eagles are a good team. Saquon Barkley was a huge free agency signing for them. Another running back the Cowboys could have pursued. And the Washington Commanders are perhaps one of the biggest stories in the NFL this season. I thought they would be the most improved team in the East. I didn't think it would mean that they would go from one of the worst teams to all of a sudden they're a playoff team. But that's what it looks like. They're 7-3. Jaden Daniels is probably the front runner to be Offensive Rookie of the Year, playing phenomenally for them. He has them in a playoff spot. New head coach Dan Quinn has got them cooking so far on the season. The Giants look horrible. Daniel Jones and that contract look inexcusable. In the NFC North, the Lions are dominating 8-1. It's looking kind of like, we still got half a season to play, but it's looking kind of like my preseason prediction of the Chiefs and the Lions in the Super Bowl could end up happening. Those have looked like the best two teams so far. The Lions are 8-1, Chiefs are 9-0 despite their injuries. The Lions have some injuries as well, and their defense isn't necessarily great, but their offense is very talented. They had 5 interceptions last night and still found a way to beat the Texans. I think they're a very good team. I think they've learned from their mistakes last year in the NFC title game where they just went for it on 4th down seemingly every time and just took too many risks. I think they've learned from that. And with the 49ers being in a tougher spot this year at 5-4, the Lions are in a very good spot to end up hosting the NFC title game, which would be huge in order for them to make the Super Bowl. The Buccaneers are the team I picked to win the NFC South. They got off to a good start at 4-2, but they've lost 4 in a row. They've just, part of it has been injuries. Losing Mike Evans and Chris Godwin over the last few weeks to injuries has really hurt their passing game. Baker Mayfield was looking really good early in the year. I think he still is looking really good. He has had a great season and is really proving the haters wrong. He has 24 touchdowns and 9 interceptions so far in the year. But they've struggled in recent games, but they're still in the hunt. They're just 2 games behind the Falcons. Kirk Cousins and the Falcons are looking good, like they're going to possibly win the NFC South. But we still got some games to go. I think the Bucs are still going to be in it. In the NFC West, as I said, the 49ers are 5-4. They've struggled a little bit this year, and they've had some injuries as well. Christian McCaffrey's missed all the season until this weekend, so that has hurt their offense. Again, that's kind of why I argued he should have been MVP last year. He is what makes that team go. He has been the key to that team's success over the last 2 years. It's why I think he should have been a stronger candidate in the MVP conversation last year. Also, I'm sorry, I've been a little away from the mic. I really hope the mic has picked up this because I've been speaking for over 40 minutes. The Cardinals are 6-4 leading that division. That is crazy. The Rams are 4-4 and the Seahawks are 4-5. So that's a really close and tight division there. I think the Rams and Seahawks are 2 teams that are pretty similar. I think the 49ers are still the best team on paper, but the Cardinals being out in front 6-4 is good for them. I think it's looking good. I mean, for them they've got a decent shot at making the playoffs with halfway through the season. Let's just go with the current playoff standings. In the AFC, we've got the Chiefs, Bills, Steelers, Texans, Ravens, Chargers, and the Broncos at the 7th seed. In the NFC, we've got the Lions, Eagles, Falcons, Cardinals. Then in the wildcard teams, we've got the Vikings, we have the Commanders, and the Packers at 6-3. With the 49ers currently missing out on the playoffs, but I think they're going to get back in the hunt. We've got an exciting season so far. I've been talking long enough in this video, and I really hope you stay and watch the whole thing. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. That's all I have for this video. Let me know what you think of the current college football playoff rankings as well as the NFL season so far. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Who's going to win the college football national championship? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.